Today we are going to be talking about world building and settings. Your world can be so much more than just where your character lives. It can invoke themes, set the mood. Your character should interact with the world, and the world should push back on your character, creating problems, conflict, tension. Today I'm going to give you some tips on world building and setting so you can create a rich world for your reader to get lost in. I'm Carly, and this is the Carly and Brooke Show, where we interview top authors and bring you tips and tricks on writing so that you can become a successful author someday. Be sure to check out our Instagrams for daily tips on writing. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 1. You want to establish the time and era that your novel takes place in. There are a few ways you can do this. You can try describing a room and describe certain items in that room that are from that era, such as if your book takes place before indoor plumbing, you can mention the bedpan. Maybe it smells bad. If your novel takes place before electricity, you can talk about the candles, the wax dripping down the walls. You can also do this with language. People talked different back then. The etiquette was different. Or let's say your novel takes place in the future. You can describe technology that we haven't yet seen. You can use futuristic slurs or words. But be careful not to overdo this. This can become annoying to the reader, but it's really fun to sprinkle it in there to give the novel just a little bit of flavor. So whatever time your novel takes place, you just want to establish that in chapter 1 so that the reader feels grounded. All right, so now you have to establish your world. Is it an urban fantasy? So are they from Earth, our planet, but have supernatural creatures, vampires, werewolves? Now, once you start getting into the magic system, that's kind of a whole nother topic that we can talk about another day. But obviously the magic system has its own rules, but you can really do some amazing stuff with world building, incorporating your magic system. So again, in chapter 1, you want to establish the place. So after you get your place and time, you can start to talk about the certain types of weather that they might encounter in this world. How many moons does it have? How many suns? Does it have a sun and a moon? What are the plants like, the animals, the creatures that live there? So if you are writing a different planet, a different world, it is helpful to have a map, to draw a map of it. That way you're not getting lost as you're writing your book. And then ask yourself these questions about your fictional planet or world. So the first question you want to ask is, again, how do your characters speak? Do they speak like us, modern day, or do they sound a bit different? You want to also know the transportation. Are they using horses or creatures to get from point A to point B? Are they mostly walking? Or how are they getting around? What is the climate like? Is it got all 4 seasons, or does it have a totally different season that we've never even heard of? What is the terrain like? Is it more mountainy or more beach life? So you want to establish the roads, the plants, the creatures, and you don't want to just dump this on the reader right in chapter 1. You want to sprinkle it in so you can have an important scene. Maybe in that one scene you can mention just about the weather or just about the time, the era, describing things that existed in that time era. So you just want to sprinkle that in throughout the beginning of the chapter, throughout your whole novel, really, and then that way the reader gets lost into your world. Other questions you want to ask about your fictional world are, what is the history of the planet? Is there been different leaders? Have there been wars? You also want to know what the dangers of this planet are. Do they breathe oxygen like us, or are there certain limitations, certain boundaries that they can't cross? So these are all really good questions to ask about your fictional planet or world. And even if you're doing it in a modern urban world like ours, these are still great questions to figure out kind of when exactly your novel took place. Definitely in chapter 1, you kind of want to give them at least a time of, like, are they in the future? Are they in the present? Or are they in the past? Are they on planet Earth? Are they on a different planet? And then as your chapters proceed, you can sprinkle more and more in and really create an engaging, rich planet, this rich world for your character to interact with. So a good way to make sure you're not just dumping this all on the reader is when you go through your editing process. Now, when I do my editing process, I actually like to kind of dedicate a whole draft just to my world building and settings, And that way I'm not getting distracted with my plot or characters. And then I can go through and highlight each time I have like a world building description or like setting the scene. And then I can highlight that and see if there's any big blocks or if there's too much on one page. And then I can break that up and sprinkle it in. So that's a good way to make sure that you aren't info dumping this on the reader. Okay, so let's talk about how you set the scene, how you ground the reader and let them know where they are. Let's say you have a character that's going to this motel. Rather than just giving the cliche descriptions of a cheap motel, like the awful photos on the wall or like the tacky drapes, go for something that reminds the character of something. So maybe the tacky drapes remind them of their grandmother's home. Then that's a great description to hold on to. Or maybe those awful pictures on the wall reminds them of a school, a class that they hated, this teacher that just had awful art on the wall. You can play around with it, but rather than just giving generic descriptions, have some kind of sentimental meaning to your protagonist, your point of view character. Now, obviously you can't do this with every scene, otherwise it will lose its power. You can, this is a great technique to ground the reader and give them a setting and set them in the scene, but also giving them part of your character's backstory and giving them a little bit of your character's personality. So you get like double duty. You get the world building and you get a little bit of character development in there. So when you are describing a setting and you don't necessarily want to tie anything emotional to your character at this point, don't just list a bunch of stuff, like say again, you're going into a hospital. Don't just start listing IVs and patients and beds. I mean, you can if that's kind of setting the mood, if that's really how your character sees things. But a lot of times when we walk into a room, we don't just start listing off things that we see. We interact with it. So we might walk to the receptionist. We might see the pens first. But again, a reader, but a lot of times with those settings that almost everyone's been in, like a gas station or a hotel or a hospital, readers can imagine a lot of it themselves, so you don't want to waste a bunch of words just describing things. So just give them a few really good key details, unique details that you haven't heard before. And then that's going to be unexpected, and that's going to pique curiosity in the reader, and they're going to be more interested in that setting, in that world building, because you didn't give them just a cliche description. Another fantastic way to create your world and set your scenes is to use all 5 senses. So often we forget to use smell and taste because we're so focused on our character's body language and body action that they're feeling stuff all the time and they're seeing stuff all the time because we're describing it, but we forget to have them actually taste and smell and hear things. So a good way, again, to check for this in your manuscript is to go through and highlight every time you have your character smell, taste, see, hear, or feel something, and you can break up those senses and alternate between them. But again, you don't want to do this on the first draft. The first draft, I call it my word vomit draft. I just get everything down on the page, and then I worry about this little editing stuff later on in the game. All right, this is our last tip for us today, and I will be making another video on world building and settings in the future and go into some more details about other stuff, but I figured these were some very easy stuff that you can utilize in your writing today to make it so much stronger. All right, so I got one more tip for us today, and it is try to not be predictable. We kind of talked about that the last tip, but try to give your readers something unexpected. All right, so a good example of this is, let's say you have 2 characters who are about to break up, and it's the cliche, the guy's breaking up with the girl, so he takes her out to a public restaurant so she doesn't freak out and cause a scene. I think we've all seen this in every movie. So you could make this so much more interesting if you flipped it or twisted it in some way. Maybe the guy is about to go break up with the girl and she jumps in and does it, and she had already been thinking about it forever, and in her head, she's like, oh good, we're at this restaurant, so maybe he won't make a scene, and she flips it and makes him be the dramatic one. Or, I mean, there's so many ways you could go around it, but looking for different ways that you can flip things on their head or totally just throw in a completely unexpected thing. Maybe the fire alarm goes off right before he's about to break up with her, and that causes all these other problems. You can get creative with it, but try to look for areas that you can be unpredictable in your settings and in your world building. Another good example of this is, say you have 2 characters about to kiss for the first time, and we've all seen that sunset at the beach kiss. And so you could flip it on its head again. So maybe right before they're kissing at sunset, this big wave comes in and knocks them both off their feet. Again, like, you can be as creative and as different as you want with this, but you just want to look for ways to, when you're leading the reader one way and they think they have it figured out, they're guessing like, oh, this is how it's going to happen, and you flip it, and then that will immediately pique their curiosity and they'll want to keep reading. All right, well, that is it for us today. I hope you all learned something new about world building and settings. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. And if you found this video helpful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll be notified when our next video is up. Brooke and I post a writing video every Wednesday, and we would love to have you on this author journey with us. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.